been moved and seconded to approve the work session agenda. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We have one item on our agenda, which is about school board governance structure. We discussed this at a Saturday work session in general with a facilitator, and listened sort of to everybody's sort of comments, and the governance committee has been working that. So I'm going to turn it over, though, to Ms. Randall to talk through some of the ideas and where things are going, and then we'll go from there and have additional discussion.
Okay, thank you. So in earlier this summer, we had Doug Eady come, and we all received a copy of his book. And I I gave homework, and I really appreciate those that did homework. But I just wanted to take a different look and approach at maybe some of the work that we're doing as our county is growing, and we're finding that things that we've done in the yesteryears are being updated on the county side or school board side. I thought our school board also needed to maybe get some updates so that we could run a growing county more efficiently. And so currently, on the board behind me, you see our current system is the FABC, Governance, Legislative, Joint Schools, and Discipline. And what I am, and the board, and the Governance Committee has worked to try to put together is based on the examples that Doug Eady has outlined in his book. And I'll flip this around. It's hard to read because these markers weren't great, but so in the governance committee, what we're looking at maybe doing, originally in our talking and in further reading, we had said we would try to go with the governance and then strategic and operational planning, performance monitoring, and external stakeholder. But upon reading a little bit further and thinking about in terms of our board and the duties and other committees, that advisory committees that we serve on, I felt it was kind of a better practice to modify us down to two. So keeping the planning and operational, strategic planning and operational committee, keeping the performance monitoring committee, and taking the external stakeholders and putting it more into the planning, because that's the part where our story needs to be told, and then in governance, because that's also where our story needs to be told. And what I wanted to see was, basically, before I go too much further, I have to say that one of the things that kind of struck me as a new board member, I can't talk with this on, sorry. It struck me as a new board member is I felt lost, like I didn't have a direction. I knew where everybody's parts and pieces were, but a direction was where I felt lost. And so one of the things that I think that showed me some good examples and not so good examples has just been my almost year on the board. One of the, and we talked about this with Dr. Kisner too, with the whole COVID scenario, when he formed his committee of folks to, work in these different categories and put together all of these reports and stuff, we weren't included as a school board. And I felt like that we were operating in two different entities, and we were just the receivers of a lot of information, and then, of course, feeling, just like everyone else, immense pressure to make good decisions, and it was really challenging. And so if I could say better, I would have liked to have seen us involved as members. We didn't have to, I don't necessarily have to participate in talking, but just hearing thought processes of how that were to go. One of the directions I think is really good is how we have taken a better look at maybe some of the ways discipline has been done in our county, and having opportunities to be given information on restorative justice, having opportunities to hear from Lisa on updated codes and laws on the discipline that our county needs to consider. And there's still, I think, more work that we can be involved with in that. And the MOUs for the SROs, and sitting and talking with the sheriff's office about that. So I think that's been really good that we've worked as a board to do that. But we have, still a ways to go in streamlining our information and working with staff and Dr. Kisner, not just obviously, like I like to do occasionally and shoot off 1,000 question email to him, and then he's like doling it out like a deck of cards, and, that it would be obviously we don't want to, as he has said to us before, put extra project work on a very swamped staff and very stretched staff. So these are just some thoughts and ideas, and, more was brought out in the book as to what this covers. And so I'll just leave it there as a place to start.
Ms. Randall, is there either recommendation or of how you would like the restructuring, or do you want to talk through the, page 2 of, I believe, which was given to us? Because I think you said you'd had some update regarding your thoughts.
Yeah. Sorry. So the only update that I would like to make is changing it to being the Strategic and Operational Planning Committee and the Performance Monitoring. The external stakeholders mostly has to do with, I just think that it's a way, we can combine that into other things so that we don't have to necessarily have another committee with another meeting. And because all of these meetings are not just our board, it's with Dr. Kisner and his staff. So I feel like it's just not where we need to be. So that would be the only part that I would want to say. We can identify that external stakeholder part in our planning, and we can do the external stakeholder part in our governance.
All right, so the recommendation is to have a governance and board development training committee with a strategic and operational planning committee and the performance monitoring committee. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I was setting it forth. Okay, so are there any questions about the structure? What, bullets are under each of the two, what I would call the strategic operational planning and the performance monitoring of, you think things are in the right columns, not in the right columns, or any discussion there? Or what, or needs to be added to any of those areas?
Where do you want comments? When do you want comments? Yeah? Oh, okay, sure. Did anybody else want to start first? Go ahead. Oh, okay. So I took a look at it, and I was thinking we have several committees now, right? So I wanted to know, so for example, the FAB, and I saw you put it up there. So what is going to give and what's going to take? How are we going to incorporate the ones that we currently have, and where are we going to put them? So for example, I noticed that you have the FAB on the strategic planning. So we also have the legislative. I wasn't sure where that was going to go. And how would we ensure that we don't stretch our board with the same people? Because usually we go like, who wants to do what? And you see the same hands going up. And so what we don't want is, especially when I came new, I just took everything, right? And then you learn.
Yeah.
And so you were like wondering, like, oh, I wonder why, to pick me. But I know now. So,
Although you don't find.
yeah, just a better structure. How does putting more layers, right, determine how votes and procedures go?
Sure.
Because like right now, I noticed that we have 3 on every board. And so, when 2 say, okay, this is what we want, and then the third person is like, okay, yeah, I'll have to go along with it. And I understand that that's how it goes. That's how our court is right now, too. But wouldn't it be better, because we're apolitical, that we should, even if we put 4 people, it shouldn't matter. Even if we put 2 people, but I understand there needs to be 3 or more, that if we have 4, the community and the public would know that we all are agreeing on something, like this, for example. And so I think that, just thoughts, food for
Yep.
thoughts. I'm not saying
Yep.
that anybody,
Yep.
have to take on what I'm saying. And so,
I can answer that.
oh, sure, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to pop up here again real quick. So basically, we have this as our current structure, and this goes away. Okay, and so we're going to kind of restructure, reframe, and rethink how we work and how we operate. And so if we're all taking a picture in Susan's head, this is how, like, my thinking, my movie in my head is working, is, again, the idea is making us all sort of governance experts as board members in eventual, because right now, like, when you serve on FAB, you have a 2-year time period that you can do that as well. And basically, what we'd like to do is, this is going to be board chair and the head of planning and the head of monitoring. That's what this committee is gonna be. It's the head of these, they're setting the agenda, they're making sure that nothing comes to the board that's necessarily from staff, like they just are, unless we ask for it. And so it comes through, planning is saying, the planning and strategic planning committee says, we would like to see, because we would like to move, or we'd like to do, and that's gonna come, their head person brings it to governance to get put onto the agenda. Same with performance monitoring. We're being the leader in asking what we want to reach our, of course, we have to have goals set up. To reach our goal, we're asking if we wanna talk about lowering class sizes, we're gonna ask for a class size report to help us in our budgeting process in trying to look at how are we doing and where do we need to go. So the head person from here.
Okay, stop for a minute.
Sure.
Don't go too deep
Okay.
right now. Just
Okay.
let's stay at the surface.
Sure.
And so, great idea on paper. And if we have something a framework that already exists, that would say, okay, this school already does it, and this is how, do we have that?
Well, he has explained it and brought examples.
Who
in
is
the-
he?
the book we
Oh,
just
okay,
talked
no,
about.
I'm
Yeah,
just
yeah.
saying, when you say he, I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, Dr. Kisner, or are we talking, okay, yeah, please. Okay, so I just want
Yeah.
to know, he,
Yeah.
the book, or he,
Yes.
Dr. Kisner, so yes.
Yes.
Okay, so let's stay on the surface for a minute. If that's the framework, and yeah, I remember all of that.
Okay,
So I will go back to the prior,
right.
and I'll go back to what I said before.
Mhm.
If that is where we're going,
Mhm.
then what I just said about being apolitical should even be stressed even more. Because if you're going to have a chair that is also going to be in charge of that, then you're pushing your agenda, and that's not what we want. We want to be pushing the agenda of what the public needs, what the school system need, and working with, the departments. That's what I envision.
Okay.
And I know
And
that,
I fit that, I hear that, I fit that, and I'll tell you how. Because before there's this, there's going to be, if there's going to be a retreat with all of us. And in that retreat with Dr. Kisner and his cabinet, we are going to decide where are we and where do we want to go? What kinds of planning do we want to do? What kind of performance monitoring do we want to do? That's all done, all 7, and his staff all together working. Once we have decided that framework, that's when we sort of use these as our breakouts. Oh, thank you. That's when we use these as our breakouts. So there's work that's been done before these go to work. And that work that takes place is all 7 apolitical of us, no agenda, just saying, where are we as a county and where do we want to go? And once we do that, then we have the framework of the work that the planning committee will do, performance monitoring will do, and governance will do. So that would be the, like you said, the prior work. So nobody's agenda is pushed. It's a board decision agenda along with Dr. Kisner, along with his staff. So everybody's on the same page, and then we go to this.
So,
Does that help?
I just wanted, I'll round up and then I'll done. I'll just round up and I'm saying, I'm guilty. I'm the guilty one. And I'm the guilty one that said, I wanted to be in the room when you were making these decisions. And I'm the guilty one that wanted to know I wanted us to have, not just listening to you, but be in that room as a fly to see how it was going so that we could talk to our public or anyone, a parent or anybody could call us instead of waiting for a work session. So that's where that came from. And so, yeah, I'm that one, like, hey, somebody, and I actually picked Susan. Like sometimes I picked Sarah for certain things, I picked Susan. I'm like, Susan, maybe you need to be in there. So yeah, great, thank you. Go ahead. I think that one of the things that we're trying to do is we all have outside jobs and we're trying to make it more efficient so that the committees are more structurally looking at what we need to do. And then when the governance committee meets, they're putting an agenda together based on that. It's not like the chair wouldn't be able to veto something that the FABC or that the Strategic Planning and Operation Committee brought. She wouldn't be able to say, well, I don't want to put that on the agenda. It would go on the agenda for all the board to consider. But what we're trying to do is improve communication so that we are working more effectively and try to reduce the number of meetings that we're having, because it's difficult for us to get 7 people together. I mean, I feel so bad for Missy sometimes trying to schedule when can she get all 7 of us in the same room at the same time. So I think that this is sort of an overview for what we anticipate, but what we'd like is something that just works more efficiently and works in parallel with the superintendent, so that he's not communicating to us things that, like his staff isn't coming to the FABC and telling us something and then coming to the whole board and giving them the same information over again. That we're trying to minimize those kind of log jams that just take up everybody's time without necessarily improving the information.
And we still have full board participation. So, like, eventually, I mean, Ms. Healy is on the FAB for the first time in her 20-year career here. And, but
I think I was on it a long, long time ago. I
Okay.
it's just forgot.
yeah.
Maybe like 10 years ago or something. I
But
don't know.
I think this gives us an opportunity to, with only having planning and monitoring, it really gives everybody a chance to learn all of the parts of governing and what it means on a school board, and allowing us to fully understand all of the parts of planning, all of the parts of monitoring, and all of the parts of building our governing body.
If I could make just a quick comment.
Yes, ma'am.
I would be interested of the board's reaction, which I think I heard at the Saturday, that work session, is that middle, I'm going to call it the middle box, is about the performance monitoring committee, because that was something I thought that I had heard some consensus in some, maybe not calling it that, but the sort of the topics there, if, from my perspective, this is the new part of it, in my opinion. Planning and strategic, we can call it a lot of different things, but we have some of our committees that are involved in that. I mean, I think it can be broader, and when we start to look at the strategic plan, there may be an ad hoc committee. But I would really kind of want to get, personally, sort of the board's thought on that middle block. Is that a necessary, because that to me is the new ad, in my opinion. So, like I said, I'm not certainly wanting to stifle, but I'm just sort of curious, your all's thoughts on that, and also, I think, hearing our thoughts, also a conversation with the superintendent as well, because sometimes whenever there may be reports and things that we want, we can't say, hi, we need them next week. I think this group, there has to be some type of discussion with the board of, where are we going? It's all of this is being driven as beginning goal setting. But anyway, I was just curious of people's thoughts on the middle block or whatever.
So I don't know where this one falls, middle or not, but I'll go back to, because I said a lot, I'll go back to my concern, which is the same people being in the same positions, and then I think that it needs to be evenly split, and again, it goes back to time and availability, but even as needing to be apolitical, we always have a group that is silenced by the majority, and it's dominating, the agenda and of like-minded board members. And so, how many people will we be having on each committee, and how do these committees are going to have the same influence, even though after all of us talk about everything and we discuss and we decide this is what we're going to do, how do we get everyone to have that same influence, to feel that they are, because you're as strong as your weakest link, and in order for us to be an effective board, we have to be inclusive of all influences. So I think that, when we choose a chair and a vice chair, and you just feel like there's certain things that we're going to have for this year. That was a comment, but if anybody wants to answer, that's fine.
I can just say only this, is that there's 7 of us, and if we have chairperson, well, it's going to be a woman because there's all women now, but we have chairwoman serving as chairperson of governance, and then 3 of us on planning, and the other 3 on monitoring. And, it makes everybody, have a participation piece in the structure of the committees. And then, just the same as we decide now, a chairperson for a committee, we would do the same for those as well. But I do see what you're saying, too.
So I wanted to first say that I'm pleased to see the performance and monitoring piece here, because I feel like we've been a little lacking in collecting that information and looking at that information over the past year. And so we'll hear that there's a problem with one thing or another, but we haven't really seen the data one way or the other. So I think that I'm happy to see this performance and monitoring committee. I would love to be able to do it the way it is with 3 subcommittees, but I absolutely understand that we don't have enough people we'll just be run ragged trying to do that. So I do get that. I wanted to speak to Ms. Young mentioned 4 people on a committee, and I think the problem with that is that would be enough people to make a decision. That would be 4 votes, and so it would be a committee outside of the board. And so I think it would be problematic for that reason. So I don't think it can be 4. I don't know about 2. That's certainly something to think about. I guess one thing I'm wondering is, are you all proposing that we no longer have the policy that any two board members can request something to be brought to the agenda? Currently, as long as a board member has a second, they can put something on the agenda. Was that, you were saying that everything that went on the agenda would come through these committees. Are we saying that we're getting rid of that, or was that not thought about much yet?
In my thought, it was not thought about much yet, because the idea was keeping the agenda to the priorities that we set at the beginning before we break into the subcommittees. And so anything that would to come before the board would come through the committees. And so that's my thought. I have not, but as you asked, I have not thought the other.
For me personally, I feel like in the short time I've been on the board, and those of you who've been on the board longer can speak to this, it seems like a lot of times we get sideswiped with new stuff. And the idea that we could actually, I mean, I love the idea of actually being able to have a planning session at the beginning of the year, and we're all set, and here we go. But my experience is that things come up. And so I don't want to lose that flexibility. And also, as Ms. Young mentioned about, there could be a minority of the board that wants something to be addressed. And so I would like them to still be able to bring that to the agenda. And it may be the rest of the board's not interested, but at least there would still be the opportunity to bring it forward. So those are my comments.
I have to agree that I think that we should have the allowance that if two members want to bring something, they should be able to. I don't think it happens very often, because in most cases, everything's already going through the committee. But I think it's not something that we should handicap, just in case it does silence a minority voice or a minority group on the board.
Like a safety loop
Right.
kind of thing to have.
It's sort of a safety measure to make sure that people
All
aren't getting
voices are heard.
silenced.
Yeah.
So I like the idea of being able to maintain that,
Okay.
that two people can bring something and put it on the agenda.
And I would just make the comment, too, I think that that's something that's been in the bylaws for a long time. I haven't seen, but I mean, I know we keep talking that it's a minority position. It may be, though, that there's just things that, okay, like I live in a rural district. There may be something that impacts Dr. Warner and my district, or others who have rural, that we would want being brought up. It's not always, in my opinion, it just may be other things that we need to address. And so,
And by minority, I just meant
yeah.
a small number of people.
Yeah, and I just wanted to be sure, because I was thinking, there's so many times, it's just that it's a topic that is of interest of two members. I think the thing, though, that what we learn when we do that, and it's also going to be in consultation with the superintendent, too, it's all going to still come down to time and ability to research. That my hope, that's the reason I was asking about the Performance Monitoring Committee. I think there is a lot of good in that. But I also think it has to be, when it gets started, if that ends up being the will of the board, it starts small, not asking for 500 reports over the next year, like picking and working with the board on what are some of the things that we want to do. And I think there's some reports probably every year we, as a board, should try and say, every year we should see X, and work with Dr. Kisner on, and why would we want that report? It would be because we talked with Dr. Kisner, why do we want some of these things?
Like, what are you going to do
We don't want
with
it to put
it?
it on a shelf. We want it for, like the newly revised student accommodation report. I know the board has looked at. I mean, that is a fabulous document full of a lot of good information. Don't get rid of that one. But if there's some
I'm just,
other
if-
things, so, but but I think we could start small, but I think there is some role of the board here, and I think it's going to be, if this is a direction we want to go, to start sort of figuring out what are things that the board should hear about every year. I don't know, that's where I would start.
Yeah.
And remember, too, that in each of these committees that are us is also Dr. Kisner, and pieces and parts of his staff that would help to facilitate the work that we decide prior to moving these committees into action.
Yeah,
I'm
so-
sorry, Dr. Kisner.
Let me just, and maybe it was intentional, because this is modified from the book. Because in the book, first of all, I would highly encourage you to read the chapter prior to the chapters that Ms. Randall asked you to read, because, and I'm just telling you, because in the book, it says the superintendent has an obligation to help the school board govern. And one of the issues that is definitely surfaced, I think Ms. Young raised it, but I think I didn't hear anybody necessarily disagree with her, is trust. For this process or the current process, it's only going to work on trust. And the other thing, so what was missing is the superintendent's on this committee, based on the author, okay? And if you really read the book, you'll understand why that's an important role. The other thing is, when you read the other book, which I really hope you do, or at least read the first 2 chapters, I think you'll feel much more comfortable, which honestly, I feel much more comfortable, that I don't need to know everything, long as I know the organization's moving forward, okay? And that's what leadership's about, okay? So there's got to be but I could not feel like that if I didn't have high level of trust of my staff, okay? And they knowing what the outcomes that we're trying to seek. So I really think part of the retreat, if I could respectfully say this, is you could come up with any structure you want, but at the end of the day, if you still walk out of the room suspicious of each other, you're probably not going to have and maybe time, the trust will develop. I really think that will occur. I will just say here, just a little, well, 6 months, when you start, January of 2018, is that the current system, from my observations, has a lot of flaws. A lot of times I would be at meetings, Chris would be at most of them, and I feel like the group did a lot of great work, and then we brought it back to the whole board, and we had to do the whole thing over again. And it didn't seem like the best way of using our resources. So I would just hope that, you give it an opportunity to go forward.
And one of the things, even in the book, that it talked about too, was that when, say for instance, I'm the chair for the Strategic and Operational Planning Committee, and I go into the meeting with Dr. Kisner and his staff, and 2 other board members are there with me, and we go through everything. When it comes back to the board, like, with what Dr. Warner and myself do, we give the breakdown of that meeting and the recommendations, if any, of that meeting, as opposed to hammering it all out and asking Chris to come forward and present everything. It's the duty of the school board member to be doing the presentations that need to be done. And so it becomes incumbent on everyone who sits in that committee meeting to know the parts and pieces. So when it comes back and I present, that you all can filter the questions through me, and if I need to refer to Chris, or I can do that too. But it's a lot of, like he said, that, Chris does this grand presentation only to do it again for us, and to try to minimize that. And not that we can make recommendations based on what we think, or we can just present the thing and say, board discussion is open. So all of us are aware, but it puts the ownership and the workmanship back to the board to do, and not just, running Dr. Kisner's staff, is what the book explained. And yes, Dr. Kisner, you are a super savvy superintendent. Yes, you get your A.
Remember that school board members are a precious commodity. I do agree with the performance monitoring committee. I think one of the things that would make our jobs easier is if we had clear goals of what we wanted to achieve, and we were measuring them. And I don't
think that was one of the issues when Susan and Ms. Randall and I came on the board, is that there wasn't really like a roadmap that said, this is what we're trying to do and this is where we're going. So we sort of just jumped in and said, okay, what do we want to do? I think this would kind of help, and I think it would also help with, like, board members come and go. So I think it would help when we bring in new board members, if we can say, well, these are the things that we're working on. These are our goals, and this is where we are. I think that would be a very useful tool to have, especially in orienting new members to the board and making sure that we're meeting our goals and targets.
Madam Chair? So we are creating this framework that we could move forward, that if one of us is not here, be it superintendent, that's why I'm not naming names. I'm not even naming Chris. I'm not naming Susan either. But it's more about we're leaving something so that when somebody comes in new, that it could stand. So it is about trust. Dr. Kisner trusts his staff. Therefore, I also trust Dr. Kisner. So therefore, what Dr. Kisner brings to me, I trust that it has its integrity and it could stand. But we have to ensure that once we put something in, we're thinking about who we are serving. We're serving these children in this county and their parents. That's what we have to keep in mind every step of the way.
Well, I think this actually looks a lot more efficient than what we have now, because we have all these committees, we have all these reports, and all these staff people that are spending so much time briefing our committees, and as Ms. Randall says, coming back and briefing the board. So I like that idea, and I like the idea that there's two, because we can have 3 and 3. The chair would not be on either of the two, but be the chair of the governance, and then the 2 chairs would be on there. So everyone would have an equal opportunity to participate. Hopefully we'd get to pick which one we like the best, and if you're lucky, you get that one. But if not, they'd all be interesting. My concern would be that we not go beyond the scope of what a board is charged with. And I'm thinking particularly in the performance monitoring. I like the idea, and I agree what's been said, but I think we really need to recognize that the performance is really under the bailiwick of the superintendent. And we can monitor, but it should be on a much higher level. The staff doesn't work for us, the superintendent does. So I just want to be cognizant of that, and as Ms. Hazard pointed out, I think we're going to have to be very cautious about what we're asking for, not recognizing that it may take hundreds of staff hours pulled away from something else. So that's something where I think we really do need to work very closely with the superintendent. And if it's something that is critically important to this board, then I think we make that clear and, see how we can make it happen. But I think that's going to be very important as we go along, because there's going to be an interest in getting a lot of information, but there may not be the resources that can put it together, or that maybe can help us reframe, what we're going to need. And with respect to Dr. Kisner, I certainly would expect that you would be a very important element of the committees, but I think we have to keep in mind these are board committees. And the quote, members of these committees, in my personal view, should be the board members. You would be, the resource, the liaison, and through you, the staff. But I would like to see these committees as strictly having board members as the members. Not to act alone, because that's just not going to be possible or feasible or practical. But in terms of the structure, I think that's important. I like the idea of 3, because that requires a public notice of the meeting. The public is invited to attend. It's not an even number, but even when there's not agreement, I mean, I don't go along just because I'm the, 1 out of 3. I mean, there's always, a minority report that's given, by the chair. And I think that's important, to recognize. But if this is going to work, we're going to have to be committed. Every single person is going to have to be committed, because there's not going to be room for somebody not to be here. I mean, if you have 2 people out of 3, that's missing 33%. And to me, that's too much. So if we go this way, we need to have a commitment that whatever committee you're on, you will be there, you will participate, and, give it what it needs to be done. But I think it could be a lot more efficient. And I'd look forward to getting written reports. That would be my request, pre-reports from the committee, minutes or reports that are going to come to the board, and they could be in draft form. But then we could have an informed discussion at the board meeting and not be coming up with all these questions that could have been answered earlier, or that we may not have, or, running circles around ourselves. So if we're going to do this, we should think it through and have, all the procedural elements, at least that we can address initially, and leave room for, for revision later on.
I have a question, Madam Chair. 2 questions, actually. You just reminded me of something. The fact that you want written reports, I was wondering, should our clerk, is currently part-time, should she be going full-time with all this more work? That's just a thought there. And then
Isn't our clerk full-time?
is she full-time? I thought
Yeah,
she was
she's
part-time.
full-time.
She's
Now,
full-time?
maybe she's not, maybe she's
Oh,
sometimes.
she's half,
Well,
but she's full-time.
our clerk, but there may be times when she doesn't have enough to do, and she gets.
No, I'm saying she's half for us, not full.
No,
half?
she's, no.
Because she works for us and the superintendent.
And then, yeah,
Is
so
that what
I
you
thought
said?
it was, yeah, that's what I was saying, half, okay.
Well, that's something we could work out with the superintendent,
yeah,
because
yeah,
he has more help now than he had before.
Yeah. And then, so the other thing was, I know we had a meeting one time, and I can't recall which one, that it came back and was like, yes, this is what we're going to do. And I'm like, whoa. So that means that when the committee comes up with anything, it is not voted on, it's just you're coming with a recommendation. Okay.
Madam Chair, first of all, I would like to thank Ms. Healy. I agree. I think the board has to be very careful that we stay in our lane. Our goal is not to micromanage the superintendent or his staff. Our goal is to help guide the ship and decide what our overall plan is and our overall goals. And then his job is to implement those. But I think we still need to be able to say, okay, we wanted we wanted restorative justice, and we wanted these policies, are they working? We have to be able to evaluate that and say, okay, what do we need to change, and how can we address these? But I agree with you. I think we have to very carefully spell that out. Thank you.
I
And
wanna-
some of those will have, like, evaluating restorative justice, or evaluating in the performance monitoring, it may have a financial aspect that we want to then consider in when we work towards budget, whether we need, more help with, social workers, or do we need more behavioralists, or, if we're talking restorative justice or something like that, we might see that there's a financial piece that we need to consider for a future budget item or something, too.
And that's what's nice about all 3 chairs meeting together, because then those things could say, well, we may need more money for this, so how can we address it? And I think it makes the communication more efficient and more direct.
So I wanted to first say, when it comes to this performance monitoring, I mean, and I know what they say about assuming, but it's my impression that Dr. Kisner is looking at lots of reports and lots of data in order to understand what's going on. And so for him to share that with us should not be, but I don't know, that challenging. And then my other thing is just, how do we make sure, or what are the ramifications of board members who don't show up? So as Ms. Healy rightly says, if you have a committee of 3 and one person can't make it for whatever reason, it becomes quite something for other board members to have to pick up the slack all the time.
So it goes back to where we started when I said that, we're not gonna, we shouldn't have to
But we
run ourselves thin. The other thing, you all know how I like to talk about pilot and evaluate. Those are my favorite things. So once we put this in place, I was trying to figure out, I know we write things up and we just go. When can we look at it in a way where we put it in place, create the framework, get it started, and then there's decide, okay, we're going to pause here and reevaluate and say, yes, this works or this doesn't work. I mean, do we have an opportunity to do that? And should we put that in and, to make sure that it's working and grease some more wheels if we have to? Okay.
I had actually thought that, and same thought, that maybe like at June point, let's look and see where we are and if we need to make a change. The other part of this that I would just ask the board to consider is that, we work together as in our own way first with Dr. Kisner, staff, in establishing what it is that we want to establish as our framework. We break into our committees, but we maybe even consider having, and it doesn't have to be Doug, but we can have someone else come in and give us, if this is where you're going, let me give you some guidance. Just kind of an opportunity to have a teacher, if you will, in someone that has experience in this, to kind of give us some thoughts and guidance as we navigate this. I appreciate this board so far, going along with the idea of, board development and the things that we've had brought before us. And so just as another way to make sure that we have things in place the way that they should be working.
Are there any other, I know I do like to give the board a little bit of a break. I just wanted to throw out just sort of maybe, as Ms. Young discussed and everybody, either a pilot or trying this out. There may be a thought, and I'm just throwing out, sort of in January, I hate saying December, but I'm just going to throw it out there as an idea of some opportunity for the board to be together to do that goal planning. I know we keep trying to keep doing it, and there's always, but to do that and sort of do a mini, I don't want to say trial run, but of doing that. But we would, in my opinion, work together, I think, to come up with December, early January, because the way we are going to be most effective, and we all know this, is when we come into this chamber and we're sitting in those seats all together behind the budget. I mean, when we all sit there, and I'm always cheering when it's Dr. Chase up there, because you've done a great job, there's, but we're still all sitting there visual, and we are behind that document, and Dr. Kisner and what he's brought and everything. And if we come up with 2 or 3 other things too that we know throughout, so I would just, poor Missy, I hate giving her this job of polling us to find availability, but that would be an idea, and then kind of trial run it under this structure and see if it makes sense, and we tweak it and we learn. That would just be a suggestion potentially going forward. Yes, Ms. Healy.
I like that idea, and while, December is always a busy month, January is even busier for the school board. I mean, we're starting the new year, we're focusing on the budget, so I'd say if we really want to do this, we should look for a half a day in December. because that way, if we chose to move forward, we could get it started, kicked off right at the first of the year, rather than if we try to do this in January between the inclement weather and budget, and of course, we're going to be looking at, the changes in the hybrid schedules, and, so much going on, I'm afraid it's just going to get lost in the crowd. So we only have one official meeting in December, right? So
Correct.
that might, that might work.
And I'd recommend the first half of December rather than the second half of
Yeah.
December.
I would agree with that. So maybe for our next meeting, when we bring this back, maybe we can have some sort of structure, some of those. So keep your eyes open for Missy to talk to you about December 2020.
I want to go back to a question Dr. Chase asked, just not expecting a response. She asked a good question. Do we have all the reports? The answer is no. And one thing I will just offer you is, especially those of you who've been on the board for many years, sometimes we have to say goodbye to things. And the one report that takes not days, not even weeks, but months, at least since I've been here, is the class size report. And I think there's another way to get to the answer you're seeking. So sometimes we need to know the question and then allow us to figure out the way to get you the answer, instead of automatically assuming that the way you've done it in the past is getting you the answer. And I use that because I am, like you are, with me, a hopeful, very careful with how I use my folks, so their time is spent, going back to what Ms. Young said earlier, children first. And if we're spending a lot of time putting a lot of reports together, that, I assure you, won't happen. Okay, so I didn't really feel like I answered your question. Some reports, absolutely. Other reports we have to create, and depending on the question being asked, we could get you the answer, but maybe not in the report form that you're accustomed to. Okay.
I appreciate that. Any final comments? I do want to give everybody just a few minutes before we get started. I know I truly appreciate this. Please know, I think we're all trying to come up with the best way. And as Ms. Randall noted, we are not a small school division. We are in the top 10, and you can correct me, Dr. Kisner, in terms of population. And I think that we need to make sure, I know our school division itself is experiencing that growth, and where do we need those? And I think the board has to recognize that for themselves as well, of how we can continue to manage that. So anyway, we will be back at around 7 o'clock. Thank you so much.